So, carbon tax, the issue of the week, and boats and asylum seekers not far behind, and we'll talk this morning with the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Scott Morrison. First, we'll see what the Sunday papers are saying around the country, and shambolic scenes at the Victorian State ALP conference. Yesterday, Mark Kenny, it seems that people were in short supply.
Yes, it does. Julia Gillard's obviously looking to avoid embarrassment here, and she narrowly escaped some yesterday when a move by some forces in the ALP there in Victoria, in her home state, Victoria, they were looking to pass a resolution that would force the federal government's hand on same-sex unions, same-sex marriage. But it turns out that they couldn't get a quorum. Amazing scenes, really.
In the end, what is more embarrassing? OK, they take a position on gay marriage that a lot of people in the community support, or the fact that you couldn't get a quorum at a state conference?
Well, I suppose, I think the primary issue is in the longer term going to be more embarrassing for them. I do think it presents a sort of an image problem for the government. And it makes it hard for people to work out what it is that Julia Gillard stands for. But it does say something pretty significant about the state of the ALP. I mean, we've seen some footy games here in Melbourne over the weekend where there's 80,000 people at the game. There's no shortage of people around, but they're not obviously at the ALP conference, notwithstanding that Labor just won a federal election less than a year ago.
And Karen, they were short a quorum, but not many people had to go home for that to happen.
Well, no, I think it was 5 or something, you know. It was like really where someone goes to the toilet and you haven't got a quorum. And what does that say about the attendance at a conference?
What is the point of having a conference if you can't discuss policy?
And you have to strategically stage a walkout to...
that you had to discuss, what the policies of the party should be. They can't even bring themselves to do that these days. I think it's pathetic.
Yeah, we're going to lose this debate, so let's pull a few people out and pull a technical stunt that there's no quorum. I mean, that's pretty... it's student politics, isn't it?
And what Julia Gillard wanted to do in her speech were two things, really, to call for some courage from the party on carbon tax and also to point up Tony Abbott's negativity. Here's part of what she had to say.
It's because they know that in 2012 this mindlessly negative campaign will be exposed before every Australian. When Australia has a carbon price, when households are generously assisted, when jobs continue to grow, when the sun rises in the east, cows keep giving milk, chickens still lay eggs. Tony Abbott said of himself that he is John Howard and Bronwyn Bishop's political love child. Well, heavens knows that's bad enough. But the truth is, he is acting more like the love child of Sarah Palin and Donald Trump.
Now, Karen, the Herald Sun thought that was a bit rough.
Yes, the headline in the Herald Sun was battling PM hits below the belt. I have to say, I think, that presumes that she did some damage with that line. I heard that and thought, is that the best she can do, really? That was kind of lame to the extreme. I don't know why you would bother making a joke like that using American analogies. Anyway, yes, the story in the Herald Sun talks about that speech and talks about her, that particular line. It talks about also the fact that she arrived late, was ushered onto the stage from a side door and left as soon as she finished speaking, and contrasting this with the John Howard style of entering a conference room from the back and shaking hands on the way in. I'm not sure, to be honest, that would have done her any favours if she'd done it that way anyway. But she did also talk about the year of decision and delivery, which always to me just sounds like the flip side of all talk and no action, which was the criticism of the Labor government over the carbon tax. I don't think it's a particularly useful response to that either, because it doesn't say what you're going to deliver or what you're going to decide. It allows everybody who hears that to make their own decision about whether you've delivered what they expected or not.
What did you make of the speech, Nikki?
Well, I think it did damage someone, but it wasn't Abbott. I thought it was Gillard. Once again, it was all about Abbott and not about the government's carbon tax policy. And I think what she needs to do is hone her arguments on carbon tax, why she wants to put one in, why we need it, and forget about sledging Abbott. If that needs to happen, it should be done by someone else, not by her, and it just blew her whole speech out of the water.
Well, it does undermine your own argument when you're saying he's being relentlessly negative, and then you dedicate your whole speech and being negative about him. You sort of think, well, where's the positivity, where's the confidence in your own policy, where's the front foot response to things?
Well, I suppose that's right, but this is an ALP conference. I mean, that has a particular character, that kind of speech, so it's a speech to your troops, revving them up, and part of that involves
there was no one there to listen to it. She was speaking speaking to a much wider audience.
But even at the speeches aside, she tends to mirror what Tony Abbott does. They think it's a joke that he's going around the country wearing silly hats and standing up in front of a pile of Weet-Bix, but then she seems to want to do the same thing on a daily basis. She has to do the same kind of picture opportunity.
Well, I mean, I work in television. We like having pictures to work with. That's fantastic. But I have to say that the week after the budget, or the few days after the budget, I didn't understand why we saw her at the Institute of Technology chopping up ducks and putting things on her head. And I would have thought you'd have her standing, you know, in the Blue Room where they do their news conferences, saying this is a serious budget, it's about serious things, and we're serious about cutting spending and getting to surplus. But that wasn't serious. It was frivolous, and it demeaned the budget, and it reduced the debate to the Tony Abbott's turf, which I just didn't see the logic in.
So we have two opposition leaders. We don't have a Prime Minister. We have two people carrying on like opposition leaders.
And the impression is that it's just chaos. I just feel it feels like chaos.
I think they're both doing a sort of a political version of planking. You know, they're just sort of pulling stunts in various places, and there's not really a lot to be said.
2 years after an election. Nikki, not all roses, a bed of roses on the other side either, apparently. A report this morning that Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey may have had a heated telephone conversation pre the budget.
They did, over the question of family trusts. Hockey went out some time ago and floated a proposition that family trusts might be taxed in the same way as companies, and then he had to pull back pretty quickly the next day. Because it was an issue that hadn't actually been passed by the shadow cabinet. Now, there was a conversation between Abbott and Hockey about this after. I gather it wasn't quite as heated as it was reported today, but nevertheless, there is a bit of unhappiness with Hockey and the way he's conducting himself in the portfolio. And there are people who are only too keen to exploit this and to publicise it. I don't think it was Abbott, but I think it might have been other people who have designs on Mr Hockey's job. And
such as Andrew
guess
Robbins.
who that might? Well, there's someone else who was out there during the week flaunting
Malcolm
his
Turnbull. We'll talk about
so
him a little later on, but wasn't there a bit of unhappiness too with the way that Joe Hockey had handled the compensation issue?
There was, and these things happened pretty close together. There was a decision taken by shadow ministers that they weren't going to get bogged down in the question of whether compensation would be unwound.
For the carbon tax issues, yeah.
For the carbon tax, and Hockey went out a couple of hours later and addressed the issue and said yes, it would be unwound, in direct contravention of what had actually been decided. So people were just sort of shaking their heads, wondering what was all this about.
My understanding was that Hockey and Abbott, or Hockey believed that they'd had a conversation prior to his announcement about family trusts where Abbott had said to him, I think we should move on, we should change our policy on this. Now, when he went back to talk to him afterwards, Abbott didn't recall that conversation. So it clearly hadn't been to shadow cabinet. It may well have been a casual conversation between them. Joe Hockey went off on the basis of that. Tony Abbott said, no, that wasn't my understanding, and then they had the
That's right.
There
was a conversation about this, but nothing had been decided.
That's
I
right.
think that was the problem.
Yeah.
OK, thank you. Well, that's the Sunday Papers, and we'll go now to our program guest, the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Scott Morrison.